They called us savages, until we spoke the language of their gods. Part 1. The ships came on a Tuesday morning in the spring of 2157. They appeared above every major city on Earth at exactly the same moment. There was no warning. There was no signal. One second the sky was empty, and the next it was filled with vessels so large they blocked out the sun. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now they had their answer. Captain Daniel Shaw was stationed at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters in Geneva when the news came through. He was a tall man with gray at his temples and the kind of calm face that made other soldiers feel safe. He had served for 20 years and seen many things, but nothing could have prepared him for this. He stood at the window of his office and watched the massive ship hover above the city like a mountain floating in the air. The aliens made contact within hours. They broadcast a message in every language on Earth simultaneously. They said they came in peace. They said they wanted to talk. They said humanity should prepare to receive their delegation. The message was polite, but there was something cold about it, something that felt like a teacher talking to a very young and very slow child. The meeting was held at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Every nation sent their leaders. Every scientist who could be gathered was brought in. The world held its breath and waited to see what would happen next. Dr. Morgan was among the scientists. She was 34 years old with dark hair and quick eyes that never seemed to stop moving. She was a linguist who specialized in ancient languages and dead civilizations. She had spent her career studying how humans communicated across time and culture. Now, she was about to hear the first words ever spoken by beings from another world. The alien delegation arrived through a beam of light that deposited them in the center of the assembly hall. There were 12 of them representing 12 different species. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange that the human mind struggled to process what it was seeing. There were beings made of crystal and beings that seemed to be living shadows. There were creatures with too many eyes and creatures with none at all. At the front of the delegation stood Ambassador of the Dominion. He was tall and thin with blue-gray skin, and a face that might have been handsome if not for the contempt that twisted his features. He looked at the assembled humans the way a person might look at insects crawling on the ground. He spoke, and his words were translated by a device that hung around his neck. The translation was perfect, but the tone was unmistakable. "People of Earth," he said, "you have been watched. For many centuries your world has been observed by the Galactic Conquered. We have seen your wars. We have seen your pollution. We have seen your primitive struggles with technology that other species mastered millions of years ago. We have debated long about what to do with you." The assembly hall was silent. No one dared to speak. "You are being granted provisional membership in the Galactic Conquered," continued. "This is not a reward. This is not an honor. This is a quarantine. Your solar system sits near a new hyperspace lane that we need to use. We cannot allow your species to interfere with civilized traffic. Therefore, you will be contained. You will not be permitted to leave your solar system. Any attempt to do so will result in immediate destruction of the offending vessel." Daniel Shaw stood near the back of the human delegation. His hands were clenched at his sides and his jaw was tight. He had faced enemies before, but never one who dismissed him so completely. The alien was not threatening them. He was simply stating facts the way someone might explain rules to a dog. Morgan was recording everything. She had brought equipment to analyze not just the words but the sounds beneath them. As spoke, she noticed something strange. There was a pattern under his translated speech, a harmonic frequency that rose and fell like music. It was not part of the translation. It was something else entirely, something that tickled at the edge of her memory. The aliens answered questions for the next 3 hours. They answered them the way adults answer the questions of children who ask why the sky is blue, with patience that was also condescension, with explanations that were also insults. They told humanity that their science was primitive, their art was crude, their religions were superstition, and their governments were chaos. One delegate asked if humanity could trade for advanced technology. Laughed. "What could you possibly offer us?" he asked. "You have nothing we want. You know nothing we need. You are a curiosity, a living museum of what the younger races look like before they grow up, if they grow up at all." Another delegate asked how long the quarantine would last, shrugged his narrow shoulders. "When you prove yourselves worthy of the stars, you will be allowed to join them. This usually takes between 10,000 and 100,000 years. Some species never manage it at all. They simply die out and are forgotten." When the meeting was over, the aliens departed as quickly as they had come. They left behind a single monitoring station in orbit around Earth, a reminder that humanity was being watched, a cage made of technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. Daniel Shaw found Morgan in a corner of the assembly hall. She was still staring at her equipment with an expression he could not read. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up at him with eyes that burned with something between fear and excitement. "Their language," she said. "There is something underneath it, a pattern, a frequency. I have heard it before." "Where?" She shook her head slowly. "That is what I need to find out. But if I am right, then everything we just heard is a lie. Not the words. The words were true, but the meaning behind them, the history they think they know." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Outside the window, the alien ships were rising back into the sky. In a few hours they would be gone and Earth would be alone again. Alone and trapped and dismissed as savages by beings who had never bothered to learn their names. "What do you need?" he asked. Morgan smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found a thread and intended to pull it until the whole tapestry came apart. "Time," she said. "Resources. And people who are willing to believe that the youngest species in the galaxy might know something that the oldest ones have forgotten." Daniel Shaw nodded. He did not understand what she had found, but he understood the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who refused to accept defeat. The aliens had called them savages. They had locked humanity in a cage and thrown away the key. They had dismissed Earth as a footnote in galactic history. They had no idea what they had just started. They called us savages, until we spoke the language of their gods. Part 2. 3 years passed after the aliens left. 3 years of quiet anger and secret work. The governments of Earth told their people to be patient. They said humanity would prove itself worthy. They said the quarantine was temporary. But behind closed doors they were building something else. They were building hope. Dr. Morgan worked in a facility buried deep beneath the Nevada desert. It had no official name. It did not exist on any map. The people who worked there simply called it the vault. There were linguists and mathematicians and archaeologists and physicists. There were soldiers who guarded the doors and technicians who maintained the equipment. There were 57 people who had dedicated their lives to a single question. What was the pattern that had heard beneath the alien speech? Commander Cole was the military liaison assigned to the project. He was younger than Daniel Shaw but had the same steady eyes and the same unshakable calm. He had been chosen because he could keep secrets and because he believed in the mission even when he did not understand it. He stood in the main laboratory and watched work. She was surrounded by holographic displays that showed sound waves and frequency patterns and symbols from a dozen ancient languages. She had not slept properly in months. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But when she looked at her work, there was a fire in her face that made everything else disappear. 3 years, said. He did not mean it as a complaint, but she heard the question in his voice anyway. The brass is getting impatient, he continued. They want something they can use, weapons, ships, anything that will give us a chance against the conquered if things go wrong. Did not look up from her displays. This is a weapon, the most powerful one ever created. Words, the right words spoken in the right way can bring down empires. He crossed his arms and waited for her to explain. She had been saying things like this for months, but she had never shown him proof. Today, she finally turned to face him. The Conquered uses 3 levels of language, she said. Common speech is what everyone uses. Diplomatic protocols are for formal occasions, but there is a 3rd level. They call it the sacred tongue. Only the highest castes can speak it, priests, emperors, the rulers of the oldest civilizations. It is forbidden to teach it to younger species. Frowned, how do you know this? I listened. I recorded everything the aliens said, and I analyzed every frequency. They let things slip when they thought we were too primitive to understand. The sacred tongue is not just a language. It is a technology. The sounds create patterns that interact with something fundamental in the universe. The species who speak it can do things that look like magic to everyone else. She pulled up a new display. It showed an aerial photograph of an ancient site in Turkey. Stone circles built 12,000 years ago by people who were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. I have been studying this site for years, said. The stones are arranged to create specific acoustic patterns. When sound moves through the chambers, it creates harmonics that match nothing else on Earth, nothing except one thing. She played 2 recordings side by side. One was from the alien ceremony she had recorded 3 years ago. The other was a reconstruction of what ancient priests might have chanted based on the acoustic properties of the site. The patterns were identical. Sat down slowly. His face had gone pale. The sacred tongue, he said. The aliens learned it from something older, something that visited Earth thousands of years ago. Nodded. We found the same patterns in the lines, in the acoustic chambers in Ireland, in sites across the world that archaeologists have never been able to explain. Someone taught our ancestors these sounds. Someone gave them the foundation of the oldest language in the galaxy. Dr. Ben Harper entered the room. He was the team's acoustic physicist, a quiet man with thick glasses and a habit of speaking only when he had something important to say. He was holding a tablet with new data on the screen. We finished the analysis of the Antarctic readings, he said. Was right. There is something under the ice, something artificial. The energy signature matches the patterns we have been studying. Took the tablet and studied the data. Her hands were trembling. The entrance is keyed to specific frequencies, she said. The same frequencies we found in the ancient sites. Whoever built this wanted to make sure only someone who knew the old language could open it. Stood up. What are you saying? There is some kind of alien vault buried under Antarctica. Not alien, said. Or not exactly. It was built by the beings who created the sacred tongue in the first place. The Conquered calls them the architects. They are legends now. Gods from before the oldest civilizations were born. Everyone thinks they disappeared millions of years ago. But they came to Earth first. They came to Earth first. They taught our ancestors. They left something behind. And then they vanished. Looked at with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. Do you understand what this means? The species who built everything the Conquered worships chose humanity. They gave us their language when the ancestors of they were still swimming in primordial oceans. Ben Harper spoke again. His voice was soft, but there was wonder in it. The Conquered thinks they are the inheritors of the architects. They think they earned the sacred tongue through millions of years of advancement, but they did not earn it. They found fragments and built religions around them. We have the original source. We have the complete pattern. Was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. What do we do with this? Pulled up a new file. It was an announcement from the Conquered, a galactic summit to be held on a neutral world called Prime. Every member species would attend. Humanity was invited as a formality. The savages of Saul would be allowed to sit in the back and watch their betters conduct real business. We go to this summit, said. We stand in front of every species in the galaxy, and we speak the words that their gods taught our ancestors 12,000 years ago. Shook his head slowly. They will kill us. They will see it as blasphemy. Smiled. It was the same smile she had shown Daniel Shaw 3 years ago, the smile of someone who had found a thread and intended to pull. "Maybe," she said, "but first they will listen, and what they hear will change everything." She turned back to her work. There were still words to learn, sounds to master, a language to resurrect from the dust of prehistory. The conquered had called them savages. They had locked humanity away and forgotten about them. They were about to remember. They called us savages until we spoke the language of their gods. Part 3. The ship that carried the human delegation to Prime was small and old. It was the only vessel the conquered had permitted humanity to fly outside the solar system. A single transport with barely enough room for 4 passengers and their equipment. A reminder of how little the galaxy thought of Earth. Captain Daniel Shaw stood at the viewport and watched the stars streak past. Hyperspace was strange. The light bent in ways that hurt the eyes if you stared too long. He had spent his whole life dreaming of seeing the stars up close. Now that he was here, all he could think about was whether he would live long enough to see them again. Dr. Morgan sat behind him, reviewing her notes for the 100th time. The words she would speak were carved into her memory now. She had practiced them until her throat was raw and her dreams were filled with alien harmonics. She knew the risks. She knew that what she was about to do might be seen as an act of war. Commander Cole checked the weapons they had hidden in their personal belongings. Small things, nothing that would matter against a conquered warship, but enough to make him feel less helpless. The 4th member of their delegation was a young pilot named Grace. She was 26 years old with short black hair and a face that looked calm even when her heart was racing. She had volunteered for this mission knowing it might be her last flight. When Daniel asked her why, she had simply said that someone needed to fly the ship and she wanted to be part of whatever happened next. Prime appeared in the viewport like a jewel against the darkness. It was a world of crystal spires and floating cities, a place built by the conquered as neutral ground where all species could meet without fear. The human ship was directed to a small landing pad at the edge of the main complex, far from the grand platforms where the important delegations arrived. Daniel led his team through corridors filled with beings from 100 worlds. Most of them ignored the humans entirely. A few looked at them with curiosity or contempt. One species that resembled walking plants actually laughed when they passed. The sound was like wind through dead leaves. The summit hall was the largest enclosed space Daniel had ever seen. It rose for miles into the sky, supported by columns of light that hummed with energy. Thousands of delegates filled the seats, representatives from every corner of the galaxy. At the center of the hall, on a platform that floated above all the others, sat the High Synod, 5 ancient beings who governed the conquered. They had lived for millions of years, and they radiated power the way stars radiate light. The human delegation was directed to seats at the very back of the hall, so far from the main platform that the Synod was barely visible without magnification. Daniel sat down and waited, sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap. To anyone watching, she looked calm. Only Daniel could see the slight tremor in her fingers. Ambassador took the main stage to present the agenda. He looked exactly as he had 3 years ago, tall and arrogant with contempt written in every line of his body. He spoke of trade agreements and territorial disputes and hyperspace lane maintenance, important matters for important species. When he mentioned Earth, it was a single sentence. The Sol quarantine zone remains under observation. No changes to current status. That was all. A footnote. A reminder that humanity existed only because the conquered had not bothered to destroy them. Daniel Shaw stood up. The movement was small, but in the vast silence of the hall it drew attention. Heads turned, eyes focused. Ambassador paused in his speech and looked toward the back of the hall with an expression of mild irritation. "The human delegation requests the right to address the Synod," Daniel said. His voice carried through the hall's acoustic systems. Every being present heard him clearly. His laugh was sharp and cold. You have no standing to address anyone. You are provisional members with no voice and no vote. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Daniel did not sit. "We invoke the ancient right of testimony. Any species may speak if they have knowledge that concerns the foundations of the conquered." The hall went quiet, even looked surprised. That law was old, so old that most species had forgotten it existed. It dated back to the earliest days of the conquered, when the founders wanted to make sure no voice would be silenced simply because it came from a young or weak species. One of the Synod members spoke. It was the Undying, a crystalline being that had not moved or spoken in 400 years. Its voice was like glass breaking in slow motion. "The law is valid. The humans may speak. Let them reveal what knowledge they believe is worthy of our attention." Daniel turned too. She rose from her seat and walked forward. The crowd parted before her, not out of respect but out of curiosity. They wanted to see what the savage would do. She climbed the steps to the main platform and stood where all could see her. A small woman from a small world facing the assembled might of a galactic civilization. She took a breath. She closed her eyes for just a moment. And then she began to speak. The sounds that came from her throat were not words in any human language. They were harmonics, layered frequencies that rose and fell like music from another age. The sacred tongue, spoken by a human, spoken for the first time by someone who was not supposed to know it existed. The hall fell silent, not the silence of contempt, the silence of shock, the silence of beings who were witnessing something impossible. Spoke the old prayers, the hymns that had been sung before the conquered was born. She spoke the names of the architects, the beings who had created everything that the galaxy held sacred. She spoke their words in their language with their patterns intact and perfect. The High Synod rose from their seats, all 5 of them. Beings who had not stood in centuries were now on their feet, staring at the human woman who was speaking the language of their gods. Finished her recitation and looked up at the Synod. When she spoke again, it was still in the sacred tongue, but somehow every being in the hall understood her meaning. "We are not the savages you believe us to be. We are the inheritors. We remember what you have forgotten. Your gods came to Earth first. They taught us before they taught you, and we have kept their words alive while you built empires on fragments and echoes." The Undying spoke. Its voice shook the foundations of the hall. "How do you know these words? How can you speak what was never taught to you?" Answered without fear. "Because your gods came to Earth 12,000 years ago. Because they gave our ancestors the complete pattern while your species was still young. Because we are not the children of the galaxy. We are its oldest memory." The hall erupted into chaos. Some delegates demanded that the humans be killed immediately for their blasphemy. Others demanded answers. Ambassador stood frozen on the stage with his mouth open and his certainty shattered. And in the back of the hall, Daniel Shaw allowed himself to smile. The thread had been pulled. The tapestry was coming apart. Whatever happened next, the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. They called us savages, until we spoke the language of their gods. Part 4. The human delegation was taken from the summit hall and placed in a holding chamber deep within the prime complex. The room was comfortable enough with soft lighting and furniture shaped for human bodies. But the door was locked, and the guards outside were armed with weapons that could reduce a person to ash in seconds. Whether this was protective custody or imprisonment, no one could say for certain. Commander Cole paced the length of the room like a caged animal. His hand kept moving toward where his hidden weapon should be, even though the guards had taken it. He was a soldier, and soldiers hated feeling helpless. Grace sat at a console near the wall, monitoring every communication channel she could access. Her fingers moved across the controls with practiced speed. "They are terrified," she reported. "Every species is asking the same questions. How did the humans learn the sacred tongue? What else do they know? Some are calling for our immediate execution. Others are demanding that the Synod investigate. Nobody knows what to do. Daniel Shaw sat in a chair near the window. Outside, he could see the crystal spires of Prime glowing against the darkness of space. He had always wondered what alien cities would look like. Now he knew. They were beautiful, but they were also cold, built by beings who had forgotten how to be surprised. Morgan was studying her data files. Even now, with their fate uncertain, she could not stop working. There was always more to learn, more patterns to decode, more secrets buried in the harmonics of a language older than civilization. "There is something I did not tell you," she said quietly. The others turned to look at her. "Before we left Earth, we found something. Under the Antarctic ice. A structure that has been buried there for at least 12,000 years. The entrance is sealed with technology we cannot break, but the lock is acoustic. It responds to the sacred tongue." "Stop packing. You found an alien vault and you did not mention this." "I did not have enough vocabulary to open it. The summit was our priority. We needed to establish that humanity knew the old language before we could risk revealing anything else. But now things have changed." She looked at Daniel. "If we can get back to Earth, we might be able to open it. Whatever is inside could be the proof we need. Proof that the architects did not just visit our world. They left something behind." The door opened before anyone could respond. The Undying entered alone, the crystalline being moved with a grace that seemed impossible for something made of glass and light. It regarded the humans with facets that might have been eyes. When it spoke, its voice filled the room like music played on broken instruments. "You will explain. You will tell me everything you know about the words you spoke." Daniel stood to face the ancient being. He was not afraid. Fear had left him somewhere in the summit hall when began to speak. Now there was only the cold certainty that they had started something that could not be stopped. "We will," he said. "But first you will answer our questions. The architects. Who were they? Why did they leave? And why would they share their language with a species you consider savages?" Was silent for a long moment. The light within its crystalline form shifted and pulsed like thoughts made visible. When it finally spoke, there was something in its voice that might have been wonder or fear. "The architects were the first intelligence in this galaxy. They arose when the oldest stars were still young. They built that connect every corner of known space. They created the mathematical frameworks that all advanced technology depends upon. They were not gods, but they might as well have been. Everything the conquered has achieved is built upon their foundation." "What happened to them?" "They vanished. Millions of years ago they simply disappeared. They left behind fragments of their language and their technology, monuments scattered across 1,000 worlds, mysteries that we have spent eons trying to understand. The sacred tongue is what remains of their speech. We pieced it together from ruins and relics. We guard it as our most precious inheritance." Stepped forward. "You pieced it together. You reconstructed fragments, but you never had the complete pattern." "No, the complete pattern was lost with the architects themselves. What we speak is an approximation, powerful but incomplete. 12,000 years ago the architects visited Earth. They did not leave fragments. They taught our ancestors directly. They gave us the complete language. We forgot its meaning over time, but we preserved the sounds, in our temples and our songs and our sacred sites. We kept the pattern alive even when we no longer knew what it was." Its form flickered. The light within it grew brighter for a moment before settling back. "This is what I feared. This is what I hoped. The prophecy speaks of this." Frowned. "What prophecy?" "Among the fragments the architects left behind there was a message, a prediction of what would come. It said that one day a young species would arise from an insignificant world, a species that remembered what the older races had forgotten. And when that species spoke the words of creation, the architects would return." The room was silent. The humans looked at each other with expressions that mixed wonder and terror in equal measure. "You think we are that species?" Daniel said slowly. "I do not know what I think. I have lived for millions of years and seen civilizations rise and fall like waves on an endless ocean. I have watched the conquered grow proud and complacent. I have seen species worship the architects as gods while forgetting that gods can return. Moved toward the window and looked out at the stars. Your people have something under the ice on your. I felt it when your linguist spoke. The pattern she used resonated with something far away, something that has been dormant for longer than my species has existed. Nodded. We need to go back. We need to open it. Whatever is inside might have the answers that everyone is looking for. Or it might have something else entirely. The architects were not kind in the way younger species understand kindness. They were not cruel either. They were simply vast. Their purposes were beyond comprehension. Whatever they left on your world was left for a reason. Are you certain you wish to discover what that reason was? Daniel looked at his team, with his soldiers' caution and his soldiers' courage, at Grace with her steady hands and steady heart, with her burning eyes and her unshakable faith. They had come too far to turn back now. They had spoken words that had shattered the certainty of a galactic civilization. There was only one path forward. "We are certain," he said. "Take us back to Earth, help us open the vault, and let us find out together what the architects wanted humanity to know." Turned back to face them. When it spoke, there was something new in its voice, something that might have been respect. "Very well, I will accompany you. Others will come as well. What happens on your world may reshape everything the conquered believes. For better or worse, the prophecy has begun." The door opened and guards entered to escort the humans to their ship. But they were no longer prisoners. They were something else now, witnesses to a truth that had been buried for. And somewhere beneath the ice of Antarctica, something ancient stirred in its long sleep. Waiting for the voices that would finally call it home, they called us savages, until we spoke the language of their gods. Part 5. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. 3 days of silence and anticipation. 3 days of watching the stars blur past while the weight of what was coming pressed down on everyone aboard. The human ship was no longer alone. A convoy of vessels from 7 different species followed behind it, representatives who had chosen to witness whatever happened next. Ambassador was among them. His arrogance had cracked at the summit, and now he traveled in silence with questions he did not know how to ask. The Undying stood at the viewport of the human vessel and watched Earth grow larger in the distance. The blue planet hung in the darkness like a precious stone, a world that the conquered had dismissed as primitive, a world that might hold the key to everything. Captain Daniel Shaw stood beside the ancient being and tried to imagine what it must be thinking. Had lived for millions of years. It had seen empires rise and fall. It had witnessed the birth of species that now ruled star systems. And yet here it was traveling to a world it had never considered important before. "Are you afraid?" Daniel asked. His crystalline form flickered with inner light. "I do not experience fear the way your species does, but I feel something, anticipation perhaps, or wonder. I had accepted that the mysteries of the architects would never be solved, that we would spend eternity building on foundations we did not understand. Now I am not so certain." The convoy landed in Antarctica on a plain of ice that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The human excavation team had prepared the site. They had dug down through hundreds of feet of frozen earth to reveal the structure beneath. It was massive, a door of black metal carved with symbols that pulsed with faint light, symbols that matched the patterns Morgan had spent years studying. The alien delegates gathered at the edge of the excavation and looked down at the door with expressions of awe and terror. This was not a relic or a fragment. This was something the architects had built with purpose, something they had meant to be found. Dr. Morgan descended into the pit with Daniel and at her sides. Grace remained above monitoring communications and watching for any sign of trouble, floated down to join them. Its crystalline body cast rainbows on the ice walls as it moved. Stood before the door and placed her hands on its surface. The metal was warm despite the freezing air. It hummed beneath her touch like a living thing. "The sequence requires 17 distinct harmonics," she said, "spoken in a specific order. If I make a mistake, I do not know what will happen." Shifted his weight nervously. What if it is a trap? The architects disappeared millions of years ago. Maybe they did not want to be found. Or maybe they have been waiting, Daniel said, waiting for someone who remembered their words. Closed her eyes and began to speak. The sounds rose from her throat like music from another age, harmonics layered upon harmonics, frequencies that resonated with the door and the ice and the earth beneath them. The symbols on the door began to glow brighter, first blue, then gold, then a white so pure it was almost painful to see. The door opened. Inside was not a room but something else entirely, a window into somewhere beyond normal space. Stars wheeled in patterns that no telescope had ever recorded. Colors shifted in ways that explanation, and shapes moved in the light, vast and purposeful, coming closer. A figure stepped through the window. It was humanoid in the loosest sense, tall and luminous with features that seemed to shift between familiar and alien with every passing moment. It radiated presence the way a star radiates heat. Simply looking at it made one fall to her knees. When the being spoke, its voice resonated through every frequency at once, the sacred tongue spoken by something that had created it. "You have remembered. After so long, one of our children has remembered." Found her voice. "Who are you?" "We are what your species calls the architects. We are what the conquered calls gods. We are neither of these things and both of them. We are simply those who came before." Above them, at the edge of the pit, the alien delegates watched in stunned silence, had fallen to his knees. The undying bowed its crystalline form in reverence. The architect looked up at them with something that might have been a smile. "We seeded many worlds when the galaxy was young. We taught many species the patterns that would allow them to build civilizations among the stars, but most forgot. They built empires on fragments. They created religions around echoes. They never understood where their knowledge came from." It turned back to the humans. Only Earth retained the complete pattern. Only humanity kept the old words alive even when they no longer remembered their meaning. "Your temples and your songs and your sacred places preserved what we gave you. You carried our gift across 12,000 years without knowing what it was." Daniel stepped forward. Why did you choose us?" The architect's form shifted, and for a moment it looked almost human. "Because you are stubborn. Because you fight against extinction with tools made from stone and will. Because when we asked the universe which species would carry our legacy, the universe answered with a world of creatures who refused to be forgotten. You have conquered ice ages and plagues and the violence of your own nature. You have survived everything the cosmos could throw at you, and you never stopped reaching for the stars." It gestured, and the window behind it expanded. More architects became visible, hundreds of them, thousands, watching from wherever they had gone so long ago. "The galaxy called you savages, but savagery is not weakness. It is survival. It is the will to endure when all logic says you should perish. That is why we chose you. That is why you will inherit what we built." Felt tears streaming down her face. "What happens now?" "Now you teach. The species of this conquered have grown proud and afraid. They have forgotten that knowledge is a gift meant to be shared. You will remind them. You will show them that true strength comes not from technology or age but from the fire that refuses to die." The architect addressed the assembled aliens. Its voice carried to every being present. "These humans are not your inferiors. They are your elder siblings in spirit if not in years. You will treat them as such. You will learn from them as they will learn from you. This is not a request. This is the purpose for which we created the patterns you call sacred." It turned back to the humans one final time. "We will be watching. We have always been watching, and we are proud of what you have become." The light began to fade. The window began to close, but before it vanished entirely, the architect spoke one more time. "The stars are yours now, all of them. Go forth and make us proud." The door closed, the symbols went dark, and in the silence that followed, Daniel Shaw looked up at the sky where the stars were waiting. 6 months later, Earth was welcomed as a full member of the Galactic Concord with all rights and privileges. Daniel became humanity's first ambassador to the stars, established an institute dedicated to recovering the lost words of the architects, led the first human expedition beyond the solar system, and Grace piloted the ship. The species of the Concord watched humanity with new eyes, some with wonder, some with fear, but all with respect. And in temples and academies across the galaxy, the sacred tongue was taught once more, this time by the savages who had never forgotten it. Because sometimes the youngest children remember what the oldest have lost, and sometimes the ones who are called primitive are the ones who were chosen all along. The end.